Hello, health psychology students. Welcome to week 2. I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to try to keep this to about 20 minutes. And so if I go over this information fast, please follow up with me. And this week, I'm going to, some of the stuff I'll skip over, some of the stuff that, of course, these videos are not required, but I feel it's important as an instructor to do that, just for the fact that psychology is one of my favorite subjects, um, and really, it is something that I feel that you all can connect with in various ways. So here we go, week 2. Let's go through the PowerPoint here really quick from the beginning. And again, you have the learning guide, you have the information uh, for yourself. So it's not like you are not able to access information. So here are the topics in kind of that, when we build the foundation of psychology and understanding general psychology, it's important to understand um, where those, concepts and ideas are coming from. So here's the important thing is, to understand really is if you continue to further work towards your comprehension of the subject, make sure that you understand that you know there is health psychology, right, that is going to go more into understanding the genetics, right, the biopsychosocial model of ourselves, right. When we get sick, when we get stressed, there is that biological aspect of how our bodies, when they're developed, when they're made, um of how that is connected from, you know from one point to another. Then there's the psychological point, and then there's the social aspect, the environment. But we won't go into that as much this year. Here are the learning objectives. Here are those key action pieces right here: explain, describe, examine, and explain. And that's important to do that as at the end of the chapter. That'll be something that you should be able to have a general, not an expertise, not a level of expertise. Um, I am, my expertise is, you know, really general psychology, as we know. Um, but there are aspects of general psychology that I am not as much of an expert on, right? Versus other pieces. Even that would be something that I could not even label myself as too much of an expert. I know it might sound bad when I say that, but it is important to understand that even though when I was going through my master's, there was so much we studied with psychology, learning theories. Positive psychology is another subtopic. But anyways, I'm going off on a tangent here. Here are the tasks for the week. Again, feel free to pause the video as I'm doing this as well. All right, here we go. Uh, the introduction. Chapter 3 will introduce you to the genetic influences, both psychological and physiological traits. Okay, when we have the mind, we have the body makeup. You will become familiar with the structure and function of the nervous system and what that does and how it affects the way we do function as individuals, the way we think, the way we work towards understanding why we get stressed, why when we do get stressed, what that does to our body makeup, the nervous system, and when that nervous system happens, what that does to connect with our daily functions. So one of the things that I think it's important to understand is when we talk about our nervous system, right? You'll see this maybe a lot, especially in health psychology, but they NS the nervous system. When you are stressed, right, and what that does to your body. Now there is good stress, right, and there is bad stress, right? And so when we are excited about maybe a trip coming up, we might get stressed about it, right? But there is a good stress that goes along with it because there's an excitement behind that, right? With kind of just being brought in that. But when we have a negative stress and when we have lots of those happening every day, more than this, for example, what this can do to our body, what it kind of the wear and tear on our body, what it does to our hearts, what it does to specifically to our digestive system, right? When we think about that, right? If you've ever learned about irritable bowel syndrome, if you've ever learned about, IBS, we've learned about how people in their stomach aches happen. As an educator myself, as a counselor, I've had students that have been upset, with their stomach because, or their stomach upset because of these stressful events that are happening in their life. Now, when we go into that, we know that our nervous system, right, controls all of this. For example, well, not these two, obviously, but other parts of our organ and what that does. So it is interesting to know that how that has an effect, and in fact, and that's just a broad approach. When you study more and more about it, it's really interesting. Chapter 4 will discuss the consciousness with a particular emphasis on sleep and sleep disorders and what that does to your body and your daily functions, and how that affects your stress, how that affects your memory, how it affects your cognitions. Okay. Reading in the video, substance abuse is covered in a new way with a focus on what psychologists have learned from studies about what environments lead to addiction. Right? When we came out of the pandemic, for example, let me see if I can annotate. When we came out of the pandemic, COVID-19, right? And I'm not saying that it's not done, but we're not gonna really go too much into that. But when we came out of COVID, right, the number of people that became more lonely, isolated, right? And what that did to the way they behave to cope, and what that did with the unhealthy and the unhealthy coping, right? That right in itself, right, with substance abuse, not only the coping with how we would deal with certain situations, but when you're isolated from your normal day-to-day living, right? That is something to be examined even further, as well in our world, especially as in psychology, the topic of psychology. So the brain related aspects of sleep are explained. And I'm going to just, again, I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but I'm going to come back to this later on in the chapter. Um, but the brain related aspects of sleep are explained in detail, as well as the effects of sleep deprivation on memory and learning. Now, have you ever had, now I've done these videos, right, when I'm tired at night. And so my brain, think about my brain. Am I going to be on my A game when I do the video? Now, I work during the day. I also teach driver's ed. I have 3 kids. And so, and then I'm doing papers and I'm reading assignments, and especially when we get into the learning journals, especially when we get into the assignments, I'm doing more and more of that. So sometimes I have to do the videos at night. Now, there's a lot of the content that I already know, so I don't need to study, but I try to read more and more about certain things, right? And to kind of keep on my game, if you could say that. So when we think about if I am lacking sleep or if I'm tired, now I'm not saying that would be sleep deprivation, but even myself of a lack of sleep when you're tired, are you on your on game, your A game, your up game, right? And what that can do in the way the body, the brain is working to function, or a lack of. So studies explained, well, comparisons were made using an MRI and a learning test between an experimental and a control group, right? So the adverse effects of sleep deprivation on health are also explained, and so there will be a link in your learning guide about the video and and some reading material. I hope that you can go dive into that video. It is fascinating. Oops, a daisy. Well, the chapter does talk about um, it does talk about genetics, right, and the epigenetics as well, and how it relates to child development, and the book does a great job about that. And this is something that we won't become experts by just reading it, unless you are going to go into you know going into genetics, psychology, and genetics. Um, but what it is, it's an emerging area of scientific research that shows how environmental influences, right, the children's experiences, actually affect the expression of their genes. To me, I would think that that would be fascinating to you as well. But think about how, when we raise our kids, and what that can do. And there's actually a well, there's a if you've ever heard of ACEs, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my, there we go, is called ACEs, right? So it's adverse childhood experiences. And just briefly, when we think about that, and I might do a separate video on if you're interested in it, let me know. If you've heard of ACEs, right? But this to me is something that is well connected because of that keyword environment right there, right? And that's a big makeup of the adverse childhood experiences. Um, but if you connect this really quick, during development, the DNA that makes up our genes accumulates chemical marks that determine how much or little the genes is expressed. The collection of chemical marks is known as the, okay, the epigenome. Excuse me. I'm having a drink of water here, and I got cut off there. So to me, when we say it's emerging in the idea of psychology and the topic of psychology and in the influences of psychology, and when we have the early psychologists, right, those, if you say, founding fathers, and what that has done to help us say, hey, you know what, there is so much more we can we can learn about the human, right, children, young people, but the importance of early childhood development, parenting, right? And so that is something that I feel that if you're interested in it and you know a little bit more about it, I'd love to hear from you as well. I think that's important. This is something that I don't know. I mean, I know enough about, right? As an educator, I had to learn about the ACEs and childhood development. But as in the world of psychology, it amazes me how we can learn more about genes. So what does that mean? My question would be, what more can we do as educators? What should we continue to work on in the world of science and as a scientist, or I'm not a scientist, but as scientists, as psychologists, I'm not a psychologist, but as a counselor, what would myself as a school counselor work to understand and try to? Well, a lot of it is the ability to empathize. It's to care. It's to educate yourself more about things that we sometimes don't think about. All right, I might have went a little bit long on that. I do apologize, but I there's so much. Sometimes there's just so much to talk about in psychology. Here's your information about the written assignment for this week, and about sleep. And so you can pause the video. Please just pay attention to the the, the logistical items here for what is required of you for the assignment. The learning journal this week will be to briefly describe the general structure and function of the nervous system. Why is the study of sleep important in psychology course, and what benefit does sleep provide to the nervous system? And we know that sleep is recovery, right? We know you'll learn about the REM cycle, you'll know about the stages of sleep and what that does. So, and what it does to, if there is that deprivation, what that does to long-term health effects, right? Stress, heart disease, stroke, other types chronic, right? That can lead to chronic issues of ourselves here. Please pay attention to the minimum 400 words. This is really important because if you don't do the minimum 400 words, that is something that is going to get you points deducted. All right. So yeah, please, word count for discussion post, learning journals, and writing assignments. Cite. Please cite correctly. If you're not sure, a couple of things you can do is make sure you go on the University of the People's Writing slash library page. Um, there is information in the learning guide to tell you a little bit more about that. Um, Purdue OWL citation is another one, but I will work on getting some citing tips and tricks for you as well. And if you're not sure how to do something, ask. That's also something you can do. So stop right here. If you want to take a quick break, I'm going to go through some of this content relatively quickly. I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to share a new screen. We're just going to go into some of these pieces of the chapter. Human genetics, you'll notice in your book that it goes into your learning objectives, it goes into the information. I would advise you to do the link to learning as well. All right. For the sake of time, again, I'm going to go over to another part of our chapter um, for this week because it is something that I find to be, you know, not more important. There's really nothing in psychology that's more important than the other because it's like scaffolding, right? We build upon each other each week, and it's a crucial to understand like health psychology. It's crucial to understand about genetics and genomes and what makes up the human body and how it kind of ticks, right, and how it manages itself, and lack of if it does not manage itself, right? If it does not manage itself, all right. Um, I cannot emphasize enough too as well the terminology. I'm a big vocab person, meaning anytime you see something in bold, that is something you should be making a note of as well. I go to the chiropractor. I'm not sure if you agree with chiropractic medicine. Some people are a little bit hesitant, maybe skeptical about chiropractic medicine, and it is up and coming. Excuse me, chiropractic medicine. Um, has been something that is not much of a I don't want to say taboo, but as a rejected practice nowadays, it is more accepted than anything. There's actually a chiropractor that I go to that gets referred to by doctors, medical doctors, neurologists. Now, a chiropractor is a doctor of chiropractic medicine. And some people argue that it's not medicine itself, but it is the way of healing. But anyways, this part right here is interesting because the spinal cord and what the spinal cord is, right? And it is truly a bundle of nerves, right? That essentially control things, right? That help us with certain things, right? To breathe, to digest, to talk, whatever it may be, right? Anything that functions in your body is because of the spinal cord. Those nerves inside. So when that's not taken care of, that can have an effect. Does have an effect, right? Can have a detrimental effect to way we operate. Um, and so it really is important for you to keep pace on that as well. All right. The chapter I think does a fantastic job of illustrating, giving you that basic, knowledge of the essentially psychology is a type of science, right? And it's important to understand, you know, of the mind because psychology is about that itself. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead the best I can here. I love the chapter highlights or at the chapter vocab at the end. All right, here we go. Some of the key pieces that I want to bring up in the next chapter: state of consciousness and what is consciousness. It is describes our awareness of internal and external stimuli, right? And so one of the things that I thought was interesting is, and when we think about, I'm going to stop my share really quick. I think I can share. Yeah, I'm going to just share this piece right here. It is not arise from any distinct structure in the brain, but rather is the result of activity and distributed networks of neural pathways. So that's why we learn about the nervous system, those neural pathways in the previous chapter, because it has a lot to do with obviously the way in which we operate, our actions, our activity, right, and how those networks. So when those are disrupted and not healthy, that is going to disrupt essentially those distributions, if you may. So when we think of in the chapter, we think about those keywords of wakefulness, sleep, and what is sleep, right? It might sound somewhat basic, but sleep is really an essential piece of our health. And there's so much more literature and work out there from psychologists, from doctors, um, that bring awareness to such as that, sleep, and what that does. Okay. Okay. So when we think of consciousness, it describes our awareness of internal and external stimuli. Now, awareness of internal stimuli includes, right, our pain, our hunger, our thirst, or sleepiness, and being aware of our thoughts and emotions. Now, awareness of external stimuli, the outside, seeing the light from the sun, feeling the warmth of the room, and hearing the voices of a friend. How does that happen? Well, we think about those nervous systems. We think about the nerves, how we work on feeding our body, right, with nutrients and what that does. Okay. But then the way it connects to our mind and the way we um, bring in various, and not literal objects, but ways of which we, eh, interact with certain things and pieces in our life, right? And how those stresses, right? We have an experience, get stressed, we think about it, we constantly think about it, our thoughts and our emotions, and those thoughts and emotions. What does it do? It affects our sleepiness. So, um, those are those internal stimuli, right? When we have lack of awareness or or an increase in self-awareness, right? When we have self-awareness, it is truly those being aware of our thoughts and aware of our emotions and what we can do with that. So we'll get more into that, and that can actually go into more about emotional intelligence. And but again, it all kind of plays together, which is the beauty of psychology and beauty of those subtopics. Biological rhythms are those internal rhythms of biological activity. Circadian rhythms is interesting, right? So that internal clock. There is a video that I would really recommend you watching. That it kind of just goes over, if you're not really familiar with, you know, the idea of circadian rhythm is it is all about that, and it has a connection to that state of consciousness, right? And when there are problems to that circadian rhythm, there are supplements people take. There are ways in which medical professionals can start looking at that. There's actually the chiropractic work because of how it does and how it works with that nervous system, right? Essentially, the spinal cord, right? All right. Disruptions in normal sleep and what they can do to your body. Okay, that's really important. Sleep needs at different ages. As you realize the way our bodies develop. You think of a young infant, think of a somebody that's newborn, and how much they sleep, and why is the reason why they need to sleep that much, right? And I think it's understandable, but why that is because our brain is developing until it's 24 years old. So if you look at all those numbers, right, you look at all those numbers all the way up to 25, especially in these adolescent times, these numbers are somewhat large compared to these ones, right? Because we're at this point where, yeah, we might be fully developed at 24, but again, those are ways in which our body is at those crucial stages, right? And the way, well, our consciousness, the way our internal ways of processing, and how when we do process those internal stimuli, and if there is a lack of sleep, if there's a lack of ways of which we, you know, work to create. I'm trying to think of the word. Well, I guess you could say that the way of which we try to balance that and protect that, um, that can easily work against us, right? And when we're not fully rested, it goes back to the wakefulness. That is the word I was looking for. So wakefulness, go back to this, is characterized by high levels of sensory awareness, thought, and behavior. Beyond being awake or asleep, there are many other states of consciousness people experience: daydreaming, intoxication. So if you can still be up, but again, your mind is wandering. Think about that. And when you're wakefulness, right, you're going to um, you know be in that high level, being in connection, right? That is key as well. And so when you think about it, in the way our body is working to um, find ways of healing that internal um, damage, right, that we create to itself during the day, right? When we think about eating, right, we put that food in our mouth at 5 o'clock at night, right? We're making some dinner, we're eating. We have to eat to get energy, right? We eat foods to feed our body, to keep our bodies healthy. We need so much magnesium and potassium and vitamin A and vitamin B and all those good things, right? So when we feed our body, right, that goes in there and it does what it needs to do, right, in the nutrient sense. So when when that's happening and I go to bed at 9 o'clock at night, right, my body is then um, in a sense of construction, reconstruction, making sure that those nutrients are, you know, helping to uh, go where it needs to go, if that makes sense. It kind of sounds elementary when I'm saying that, but if I am not going at a certain point, or if I'm eating too much before bed. Again, there's a lot of theories on not eating before bed, but there's some theories of what foods can help that. There's a disruption, and when there's a disruption, right, there's a cause for your body not going into those functions. Now, your chapter does go into talking about the functions of sleep, the stages of sleep, and those functions, right? And what is REM sleep? What is that way of helping our body going into these stages fully, right? And what it does to them. So that relaxation, right? There is a way of how your rhythm of your heart. Again, everybody's different. Everybody's body's different. Um, but when you are relaxed, you're going to feel different. You're going to be viewing things different, right? And um, your sense of awareness, right, on topics and conversations. If I were to do this video at 12 at midnight, I would not be as productive. Now I'm doing it a little bit later on. I'm a little tired, and so there are things that maybe I'm having a hard time. My brain, right, my bank of knowledge is having a hard time taking that information that I know and connecting it to what I'm saying, if that makes sense. Okay. And you might say, well, then do this video earlier, which I'm hoping to at another time, but I still feel it's important to get this video out to you. So I hope that you enjoy the chapter. I mean, there are information about sleep problems and disorders. There are these everyday connections and what it means to healthy sleep, and it's important to connect yourself to why that makes you as a human healthier each day when you get enough sleep, when you understand that uh, we can grind ourselves every single day and challenge ourselves in our work and be busy, but you can't put yourself away from the idea of what sleep does. Sometimes our bodies will tell us when it's time to go to sleep, and we'll fight that um, because there's this way of being a human and the way we create these paths of how we decide certain things. See, I'm yawning. I'm talking about sleep and I'm yawning. And so that tells me as my body, like my body's saying, it is now time to go to rest. Um, First thing that happens is my eyes get tired or heavy. And then I start to um, maybe take a few more pauses in my thoughts, right? So and everybody's different too as well. We could go into the topic of when you're most productive and how to be productive as well. So I hope that you enjoyed. I hope you're enjoying this class so far. Again, reach out with any questions. I hope all this video stuff makes sense. Well, take care. All right. Bye bye.